Welcome to Chalk Talk, presented by Option Central, the premier source for all things option football. Now sit back and get your pencil and paper ready for some option football education with another Chalk Talk from Option Central.
Hi, this is Tony DeMeo, and today my guest is one of the all-time great high school football coaches in the state of Kentucky, Philip Haywood from Belfry High School. Philip, welcome aboard.
Well, thanks, Tony. It's great to be talking with someone of your caliber.
Well, I don't know about that, but I know you've won a few. As a matter of fact, you won the last 3 years. You won the state championship. Is that right?
That's correct. We've been very fortunate. We've been blessed with some very good players, and as you know, that always makes the coaching job a lot easier. But we've had a good run of talent, and we like to believe that we play very competitive football in this area of the state. And we were fortunate. We won the last three. Two have been nail biters, and but this year we played well in the championship game and won by about 40. And we're very pleased with our athletes and our coaches, and our community was very happy.
Well, I know the community really comes out and supports your program really well. I mean, I as a matter of fact, years ago I spoke down there for you at one of your banquets, and there was a great turnout that night.
Yes, that's a big highlight for us. It's an all-sports banquet, but at the same time, it's one of those things where our kids get a chance to dress up, and we invite senior parents. And on football Friday nights, that's always been a tradition here in our community, where we're kind of a blue-collar coal mining community, and it's kind of ingrained in our kids. One of the things that we always ask our kids early in the season is, how many of you have had a relative that's played here? And it's always amazing that, 75, 80% of the kids' hands will go up that they'll have had a cousin, an uncle, a grandfather, or their dads. I've been here long enough now to where I'm coaching some of the kids whose dads have played for us, and it just kind of goes through their genes. And so that the same people keep coming to games. And it's kind of a good thing. I guess you call that tradition. But it's a good tradition to have because it's a community kind of thing, and everybody kind of buys into what we try to do with our program and with the attitude and character traits that this great sport teaches.
That's one of the great things about football in the South, and especially in the South. I grew up in New York, in the Bronx, and there was no small town communities like that, and I really regret not having to have played in a situation like Belfry, where the community is small and everybody knows everybody, and there is a tradition like that. I don't think you can ever underestimate the value of tradition.
Well, that's true, and we sell that to our kids too. I mean, it's something that we start on at the beginning of the year, and it's an ongoing process for us about how much it means to be able to wear, for us, the red jersey. And you've got family that's played. There's girls that are involved in our program. You have parents and grandparents that have played. And there's certain expectations when you wear that jersey, not only of how you play on Fridays and how you practice, but also how you conduct yourself. And when you can get that kind of attitude going, with young men and their expectations and that kind of sensitivity, I guess, throughout your community, it's really something special. I was speaking somewhere last year, and one of the questions is how do you get that kind of crowd following? It's just we're such a small community, but when we play in big playoff games, especially, our people just pack up and go. And a lot of people, even in small communities, have a hard time realizing how that comes about. And I said, it's kind of a mystique. I don't know if there's a way to describe it or put it into words, but I think people that have it or understand it, it's not something that happens in 3 or 4 years. It's something that happens over decades. And I've just been fortunate to be a part of it. I've always told people that I've stepped into a great football community when I started here 30-plus years ago, and I feel like I've just kind of built on it, and I've been blessed by being in a great place. So great situation makes it good for you, and along with that, we've had some pretty good players and some great coaches to go along with it.
Well, it's a great combination of a lot of things, and you certainly added a lot to that tradition. There's no question about it. Phil, let me ask you, so let's talk a little offensive football here. What's your basic philosophy of offensive football?
Well, my philosophy has always been one that we want to give our kids a chance to win and come up with something that does that, because I've always felt like in the areas in which we live, we may not always have the fastest kids, maybe not the biggest kids, though this year we were one of the bigger teams probably across the state. And we're going to have to compete against a lot of city schools. They're going to have a lot of great speed. They're going to have some athletes that are better than us. We're going to play D1 kids, throughout the playoffs. And what can we do to neutralize some of that talent? And so one of the things that we want to be able to do is control the tempo. We want to have an offense that's going to give us a chance to neutralize some of these mismatches that we may have if we're just trying to block people one-on-one. And what we've come up with offensively over the years, and you and I have talked many times, is we're an option football team, and we really believe in the triple option as our base play, and everything else hinges on that, because that forces people to isolate defenders. It forces somebody to take your dive play. It forces somebody to take your quarterback. Somebody has to be assigned to the pitchback, and somebody's going to have to be assigned to the receiver. And that's the offense that I've been involved in now for 40 years, and it's been successful, and people have a hard time defending that. And I've just seen many times on many occasions where we've been undermanned, and yet we've been able to have a great amount of offense. And sometimes we don't win the game, but I've always felt like it's been a big factor in keeping us in the games because of time of possession, frustration with the other team's defense. Sometimes it affects their offense. There's so many factors that go into being able to control the tempo of the game.
That's a lesson. You talk about tempo. That was a lesson I learned from Jim Valvano, may he rest in peace. He said his favorite quote was, "He who controls the pace wins the race." And there's a lot of truth to that. And if you remember, when he won that game against Houston, that famous upset of Phi Slamma Jamma, when he was at North Carolina State, it was only a 54 to 52 game. And he slowed that game down to a crawl. And there's a lot to be said for that. If people use tempo in a wise way, there's a lot of good things that can happen from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've learned some of this has come from you. Some of it's from us watching Navy and going up and visiting their staff. And some of our local colleges do a great job with this offense, too, and we visited them. But sometimes, we speed it up a little bit. You get a team on their heels a little bit, and you don't want to give them a chance to regroup, and you change the tempo. And you can do different things by calling things on the line and doing the same things that people are doing with the spread offense. So there's a lot to tempo, but I do think if you want to shorten the game, if you got a superior opponent, and we watch people, you and I talk quite a bit about teams that may not be superior, but they're out there controlling the tempo, and they make it a 28 to 24 game or a 21 to 17 game because the other team has limited possessions, and that's what you have to do to beat a superior opponent. You don't want to run up and down the floor with them in basketball because they're going to get you there, and the same thing in football. You don't want to get in a shootout with them because they're probably going to end up way ahead of you because they're athletes. So that's something that I always felt early on offensively, and kind of feel the same way defensively. They're going to have to beat us on offense. So kind of works both sides of the ball.
It's funny. Like I say, when people talk to me about tempo, I said tempo is a tool. It's not an ideology. I mean, tempo is a tool. I mean, just like you said, if we're better than somebody, if we get a team on their heels, we're gonna put the pedal to the metal. But when they're better, And you have to put your ego on a shelf. And when you get our age, Phil, you know enough to put your ego on a shelf and slow the game down. I always say this: David didn't play Goliath 2 out of 3.
That's right. Absolutely.
It was one time. He didn't go for a rematch now. Right? He got him down and then cut his head off. He didn't go for the rematch.
That's exactly right. And you're exactly right. You can't have an ego in sports. You got to do what it takes, to come out on top. And if it means you got to run the ball, 30, 40 times a game and keep that clock running, if you're able to do that, then that's going to give your kids a chance to win. And so I think it comes back to the philosophy of what gives your kids the best chance. And I've always felt the triple option was just such a great offense to give your kids a chance to win against possibly superior talent. And so we've always had that in our system, and that's the first thing we start on in preseason practice. It's the thing we work on in the spring, and everything else hinges off that. I think some of our other plays, you might say, come off of that. You're going to have to defend the triple option. If you can't, we might not run anything else.
Phil, who was your 3 biggest influences in football?
Well, my first influence would be my first, I guess you'd call it, job. I put that in quotes because I was a student teacher, and I was working at Tates Creek High School in Lexington. There was a gentleman by the name of Roy Walton, and I met him in the parking lot. Never met him before, but I had a high school volunteer coach that had a gleam in his eye, and he was very excited about football. He made me excited about it. And I wasn't a great player by any means, but I loved the game. And he said, when you get ready to do your student teaching, I played with a guy in college who's coaching in Lexington, and I was going to school down in that area. He said, if you can get assigned to his school, I will hook you up with him. And I did. We met in a parking lot. He looked like he was about 65 years old when I met him because he had white hair prematurely, but he was just in his early 40s. But that was one of the greatest relationships I guess I've ever forged, and he was like my mentor for 38 years until he passed away just 4 or 5 years ago. And I spent the whole season with him from a coaching standpoint, from beginning to end. The only year I ever coached with him, but we remained in contact the rest of my coaching career. And just the advice and the tips that he would give, and watching him how he handled kids from a character standpoint, from a discipline standpoint, because without those things, it doesn't matter what offense you run or defense you run, you got to be able to work with kids. And he was a master motivator and a master disciplinarian, and he just had a knack for working with kids and could do things that maybe you can't do today, but he was certainly good at them then. So he was certainly my first and maybe most powerful influence in the coaching profession. My second one was another coach by the name of Jim DeVries. That was my first paying job. It was way back in 1973. Coach Walton actually roundabout set me up with him. It was another job that fell through, but the coach had moved, so I ended up with Coach DeVries at Meade County High School on the other side of Louisville. And they had just been to the University of Oklahoma and were putting in the wishbone offense from the Barry Switzer era out there. Probably a little before he took over as the head coach, but it was the same principle. And I got in on the ground level of how to run the triple option with the wishbone, and I was fascinated with it. And I was only there for 2 years. And we've stayed in touch all these years, and even though he's retired, I always send him a couple of tapes to look at. And we've evolved, as a lot of people have, from the 3-back set to the more of a flex bone type offense with what we do, and have experimented a little bit with the triple gun that you are so noted for. But those 2 people have been tremendous influences in my life in the coaching profession that really stand out to me, that made such a difference. One, from a character standpoint in how you run a program and how you run a big program with a lot of kids, and the other just from doing the same thing but in a different way, but especially from an offensive standpoint, because he had such a grasp on what you were actually trying to do in running the triple option.
Well, that's funny because in 1973, I spent the spring at the University of Texas with Darrell Royal, and that's where I learned the wishbone. It was from Darrell Royal. And
those were the two guys that were doing it at that time.
And I was just getting into high school teaching. I was trying to get a job as a high school teacher. I just graduated from college, and I was an eye tailback my whole life. And the head coach that was going to hire me as a high school coach wanted to run the wishbone, so he said to me, "Learn the wishbone." Well, where the heck am I going to learn the wishbone? So I wrote a letter to Darrell Royal. I didn't know any better. I was 21 years old, and I just wrote him a letter. And he sent me back a letter and invited me to the University of Texas. Well, I didn't, I wasn't doing anything. I was substitute teaching at the time. So I just went down there, and I spent about 15 days down there during their spring practice. And I went to all their meetings and everything, got to know Coach Royal and Fred Akers and Willie Zappalak and all those guys, and really learned the wishbone from soup to nuts from those guys in that 15 days. The irony of the story is when I got back to New York, because that was before cell phones and answering machines and all that stuff, I had a ton of messages. Well, I wound up getting 2 offers to coach at a college, one at Pace University and one at Fordham, and wound up going to Pace University because the Giants were training there, and I never did run the wishbone that year. I wound up just being a backfield coach.
Right.
But I always had it. I had all that information, and in 1975, when I became a head coach at Iona College, the youngest head college coach in the country, I put in the wishbone verbatim the way Darrell Royal ran it. So that's an interesting thing that you learned it from Barry Switzer, or the Barry Switzer School, and I learned it from Darrell Royal.
Right, and then the similarities, I'm sure, were very close because they were doing it at the same time, and I'm sure they were recruiting the same kids. And you mentioned you took your first head job at the college level in 75, and I took my first head job at the high school level in 75. So, I still remember this to the day that I said, we're going to, you know how the fans are. What are you going to run? I said, well, we're going to run the wishbone. We're going to run the triple option. And there was this great fear from some of the football minds. One of them was a former coach. He said, I don't know if you can do that in high school. And I said, well, we're about to find out. So, they had this fear of balls being all over the ground and fumbles and right and left. And I faced that a couple of times in my career, but I said, just be patient. It'll all work out.
Well, that's, I'll tell you, the wishbone in those days was a really powerful offense. I always said this, the only people that ever stopped the option was ESPN. I mean, their announcers hate the option for some reason, and they're the only people on earth that can stop it. You watch Navy or Air Force, they go against Notre Dame and all these big programs, and they more than hold their own against them.
Absolutely, they really do.
And if they were running a conventional offense, I doubt if they would.
Yes, it makes it very difficult. The one thing that I've noticed in high school as we're talking offenses, I see a lot of teams that are wanting to do the so-called spread offense and throw the football because that's what's in vogue today. That's what everybody's doing. But I feel like that unless you've got a young man that's really a really good passer, that you may be doing the wrong thing. You may not be doing what's best for your kids. And that's not to say that a couple of years I had a big, strong quarterback that was slow as mud, and we didn't have any running backs, and we kind of were forced, not that we really wanted to throw the football. And we did it fairly well. We learned how to do it and had a good year, and this kid was good. But it wasn't probably what we do best. But at the same time, I see a lot of people trying to do things that I don't think that is best for their kids. I don't think it gives them a chance. If you're 3 plays and out all the time because you can't complete a pass, that's not a good thing to be against a team that can line up and run the football against you. And sometimes I think we get caught up in just what everybody else is doing, and they say, well, that's what kids want to do, but it may not give your kids the best chance. And I think you've probably seen that as well in your career.
Well, I've seen it over and over and over again, and one of the things you talked about, me running the triple gun. Well, one of the things that I did, the triple gun does, is that if I do have a passer that, like you talking about, like my first 2 years at Charleston, we had a kid who had never run the option before. I inherited him. He was a great kid, Corey Eisner, straight A student, great kid. But he was, well, let's put it this way, he raced a pregnant lady, came in third. And if slow is not a word for him. But we went 8-3 with him running the option because he could throw the ball, and we could adapt. We were flexible enough in the triple gun, being in the shotgun, where we could throw the ball 35 times. So, that was one of the advantages of being in the triple gun, is that I could tailor what the emphasis was based on who the quarterback was. And the other 10 other positions on offense really didn't have to change. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So in other words, we used the same offense for that kid Corey Eisner, and then when Durante Hunter, who was 5'7", 175 pounds, we didn't change offenses. We just changed emphasis on what we did out of the same offense. Let's talk about your spread tee base set. Now I see the picture here in front of us. Go position by position and what exactly you're looking for. You have one spread end, and will you explain it to us, the spread tee offense that you run at Belfry?
Well, this is similar to what you would see with Navy or Georgia Tech or any of those schools. They run with two split ends most of the time. We've just got our personnel. We've always got some pretty big athletic kids that can play tight end, and we usually have some pretty good linemen. So we want to get those kids on the field, and sometimes they'll be our tight ends. They may play defensive linemen for us too. Sometimes they have to do a little both ways. But we'll alternate them in there at tight ends, and sometimes we'll go with two tight ends. That's a pretty powerful formation for us sometimes. But we also do two split ends. I mean, we do the unbalanced. We give you a lot of different looks out of the set. But starting with the tight end, we obviously want a guy that can block a man one-on-one. And if he can do that, that helps us some when we were tom blocking or going one-on-one into the tight end where the quarterback's primarily the ball carrier, and we're going to load with the halfback. Our tackles, they've got to be able to release. They're going to be zoning, 50 fronts, veering off to the inside over to the three techniques and slipping up on linebackers, and sometimes we ask them to do some drive blocking, especially when we run outside veer and we get some five techniques sitting in there pretty snug. So they've got to be athletic. We like for them actually to be faster than our guards. We like bigger kids in their guards to be able to handle the ones and three techniques that we get in the even fronts. And I still think, and I think you probably agree with this, the centers may be the key to the offensive line because if you're going to play an odd front, you got to have a guy that can sometimes handle that guy and be quick enough with your guards to be able to scoop up on a backside linebacker, especially if you're under the center. And we've been fortunate enough to have some pretty good centers over the last few years, and that allows us to do a lot of one-on-one if we need to, or scooping from the backside. And that's kind of what we look for in our linemen. They can be big. I mean, we were really big for a high school team this year for a small 3A school because we could match up with most people, including our tight end. But we're not always that big, but we always look for quick guys. We really emphasize quickness over size because we got to get off the ball because we're going to read people. And that's the big key there. Split ends, first thing we probably look for is we want somebody that's going to be able to come off and block somebody because we're not a 25-time a game throwing the football. But we also, the guy's got to be able to catch a ball, and he's got to be able to run the vertical route. He's got to be able to raise up and catch a hitch and get 5 or 6 yards out of it, and he's got to be able to run a read route. And if he can do those things, that's good. The tight end, his routes, he runs the vertical a lot. Every now and then he runs a little flat route. We've got a couple of boots that he's involved in. And then the wing positions, we run our wings, we base them off the tackles. If you notice, they're inside.
Right.
And those guys, that's mainly for midline purposes where they can get inside that tackle or get inside that C-gap area to be able to get to the linebackers. And we've got smaller halfback types. We haven't had big halfbacks for about 10 years. But if we did, we might consider getting back in three backs and letting them go downhill. But, they could weigh 140 pounds or 150 pounds, but we want quick guys, and they've got to be fairly intelligent as figuring out who to block. And our fullbacks, we call them Fs. They're the guys that pack the load. We had two this year. Between the two, they probably had 2,100 yards.
Wow.
One of our halfbacks had about 1,300. The year before, our F had 1,600 yards by himself, and then we had a couple others that we were still over 2,000 yards with our Fs the last 2 years, and but totally different kids. So it's not even though one was really good, these other two together with the line that we had and the system that we had with the reads, it made a big difference. But the halfbacks have to be able to block. Split ends, everybody has to be able to block, and that's one of the things I've always liked about this offense. It's not a one- or two-man show like sometimes you get in I formation and certain sets that it requires. It's a great team offense. Of course, the quarterback, he's the guy that's got to make the decisions. He's got to be able to read the 3 technique, 5 technique, or 9 technique, depending on whether you're running triple, midline, or outside veer. And then he's got to be able to throw the ball. And you mentioned about the different kind of quarterbacks that you had the first year that you started there at Charleston. About, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, we had a great passer. He wasn't real fast. And even though we were under center most of the time, that year we threw for 1,100 yards and threw the ball well over 100 times, which for us is a lot. The next year after he graduated, or maybe a year after, we had a kid who was just an athlete who could fly. He outran one of the fastest teams we played in the state championship for a touchdown. But now he could throw the ball into the garbage can. And we probably threw 40 times the whole year, and our backup quarterback threw 25 of those. So we just ran the football, but we ran it well. But we could throw verticals, and if you can throw those, you can keep people off of you a little bit, and that's what we did. So again, it gets back to your personnel, but that's the kind of people we look for in that set, and then based on what fronts you play, we take an attitude that we're going to come at you and we're going to force you. We're a little different maybe than Navy. I've talked with them. I said, we're coming outside. We want to get on the edge. And we kind of say, we're going to come at you inside, and we're going to make you stop our inside running game because we always have a pretty good offensive line. And we usually have a couple of guys that can roll it up in there with speed, too. I mean, they can break big plays, our Fs can. And so we come at you with that, and then we come out with you. We practice all this perimeter stuff with the cover twos and different coverages and load schemes. We practice it every day. I mean, that's a big part of what we do, and that's our system.
Phil, let me ask you this: do you ever flip-flop your slots? Like if you have, like you said, you had one slot that was a really gifted runner a couple of years ago. Did you flip-flop him with the other guy, or did you just keep it the way did you have
we pretty much keep it the way it is. And this year we did have a very gifted runner. He was probably a little more athletic. Now we do flip our line. I will say that. We'll flip our tight side of the line with our split side, and we've done that for years. Some schools will do this, not necessarily just bone schools, but I've heard of wing tee schools doing that and things. But we kind of know, where the 3 technique's going to be and where you're going to shade, which side people normally slant to, and they kind of get used to having certain techniques. We know which guard's the release guard on the midline. They just kind of get used to those things. We think it kind of gives us an advantage because we practice against those techniques all the time. Somebody else mix it up some night and really give us fits, I guess, but it doesn't make sense to mix it up. So we kind of get the same looks to the tight side and the same looks to the split side. And we know we're probably going to be a little more triple option split. Tight side, we're probably going to be a little more midline and outside veer. But we run triple both sides, and we run midline, and we've even run outside veer to the split end. So you can't just zero in on either one. But we don't normally flip our halfbacks, and that's probably why we were a little more right-handed this year, because our best halfback was to the left.
Right. That's correct, I should say. What do you have for example, if you had your left halfback was a particularly good athlete, do you throw the ball more to him than you would to the other one, or like saying?
Yes, well, not necessarily. But he probably caught more touchdown passes than the other one this year. One is if we ended up in a tight right formation with our tight end to the right, he's going to be to the split side, which opens up a lot of the verticals. If people want to try to invert their safety, we can go action away. We threw one this year with some kind of a twirl motion. We started motion to the play and twirled the back and down the seam. And he just outran everybody and made a super catch on it. But we do a lot with motion, where sometimes we go no motion, sometimes we'll have short motion real fast, and sometimes we'll do the twirl where we're coming back. And because a lot of people sometimes want to slant to motion and things, and we've got them. It's funny, but sometimes we'll have people by the second to third quarter where they're just sitting in a base defense, and they're afraid to move because they don't know what we're going to do. And with that means they're really on their heels. We kind of like that, and we can do that with motion to where you're just playing straight.
Well, that's the thing about being an option team, is that, first of all, teams only have 3 days to prepare, and secondly, with all the motion and formations and stuff, you basically have to sit in a base defense. You can't match it. You can't teach all that in 3 days. Tubby Raymond, I had a great opportunity to coach with Tubby Raymond for a year, and one of the things he used to say is you can't scheme a scheme because you don't have enough time in the week to scheme a scheme. And I see that with the option all the time. Is, teams that try to scheme with us, we usually score a lot of points against them. Where teams that stay in their base defense and make us play, have to execute a lot of plays, well, the game, we don't score as quite as many against them. And, I think that's one of the advantages of the option is you only have 3 days to get all this stuff prepared for it, especially, like you said, nowadays a lot of high school teams and a lot of college teams are throwing the ball all over the place, and they're not used to playing a running team. Do you find that in high school as well?
Absolutely. We like it because nobody plays a team that really comes at you anymore. You still get the read option, and there's some people are doing some very nice things. I mean, they make it hard on us defensively. That's not to say they're not. But what we do, these double teams and veer releases and things like that, it's not the same kind of over and over kind of runs, that you see out of our offense that we do day in and day out. And it's just very difficult to prepare in 3 or 4 days, and then keep your assignments, because, like you said, especially those that scheme, because that's where you bust your big plays. Somebody will miss an assignment, or they'll stunt, and they'll have 2 or 3 things they're trying to do. And the people that play us the best are those that say, we're just going to play our defense, and we're going to make you work and see if you'll make a mistake. And sometimes that's pretty effective, because occasionally we'll make some mistakes, especially early in the year.
The other thing in your formation there to the right side, that little nasty split deal to the tight side, to your right side in the drawing, we use a little bit of that. We call it compressed set, And what we would do, especially against an 8-man front, is crack the strong safety with the end and seal the linebacker with the slot and pitch off the corner. And we found that to be great because rare does a defense practice the corner playing pitch or keep.
Absolutely. And then we found a couple of other things. You talk about the compressed sets, and we got into that a lot this year toward the end of the season, is we'd flex our tight end out, about 4 or 5 feet. And so people were playing 8-man fronts, and they've got to decide, what am I going to do with this 7 technique?
That's right.
And one team moved the 7 out with him, and he was the read. And we loaded the linebacker, and he stayed out, and we handed the ball off, and our fullbacks were ripping for 20. And then they moved him in, and we did just what you said. We loaded, and then the quarterback's going for 15. And then we ran a jet sweep once when they moved him in, and, there wasn't anything out there but the corner. So you can put just a minor adjustment by moving your receivers out, and you don't have to run every play in your offense, but basically your option doesn't change. You just do what you do. You got your basic 3 or 4 schemes with your tight end loads, your halfback loads, and your line knows what they're going to do, whether you're going to zone or veer based on the fronts. And then your quarterback reads are the same. And if they make the wrong move, they're hurting.
Well, the 5 interior guys, they don't have to know anything. All they got to do is block their base scheme. But the perimeter things you can change. When you get into that compressed set, that changes a lot of things to teams. What we used to do is we used to have what I used to call a second half surprise, where like we might not ever run that in the first half, but then come out in the second half with that kind of look. And then they're on the field. They don't have time to sit down and make adjustments because halftime is gone. And so we would keep something like that ready for the second half. Or I remember one game we came out in the second half in empty bunch, and their players were all looking to the sideline. Meanwhile, we ran the play and gained about 7 yards right off the jump. But that keeps teams on that keeps defenses in a state of panic when you come out with stuff like that. And yeah, like you said, it doesn't change anything for you, but it changes a lot for the defense.
Right, because you say basically they can only do one of 2 things. And you've got your plan. If they do this, here's what we do. If they do this, here's what we do.
Right,
and especially if it's the option, well, you just read it and go. It's not that difficult. If you're running a play, some kind of rocket sweep or a jet or something, then yeah, you might have to talk them through it a little bit, but basically if they'll follow their rules, it ought to work pretty good. But you mentioned about the second half thing. That's really good stuff. We've done a little bit of that from time to time, and I actually remember my offensive line coach is up in the press box, and I've got another coach that works with the line that's on the field, so they talk with each other a lot. None of our offensive linemen play defense. They all come over and sit on the sideline, and they draw up the schemes and what we're going to do, and if the front's a little different than what we expected, and do a great job. But I remember one particular instance, it was toward the end of a half, and I said, I think we need to get in this set. And he said, no way. He said, we're going to do that the second half. He said, no, I don't want them to have time to adjust to it. And I said, there you go. That's good thinking. And so we didn't get in it, and we got in it the second half, and it was that same everybody looking to the sideline, what do we do, that you just described. So that's certainly a good thing to do, hold something out for the second half that they haven't seen.
Yeah, I used to call that the second half surprise. It might be a particular unbalanced. It might be a compressed set. It might be empty. It would be something that they hadn't seen before. And then we'd go with no huddle on a quick count and not let them ever get really, settled in. And it was always good for us. And that would be, like people always say, we made great adjustments at the second half, but a lot of times it wasn't an adjustment so much as what we're just talking about, a second half surprise that they weren't ready for. or
Yeah,
having you gone over. So, Bill, what's your favorite pass patterns?
We run a lot of practice things, but we've got 2 or 3 that we really make a living on. And we're kind of a big play pass team because we run the ball so well. One is kind of the wheel route, and we run it both to the tight end and the split end. Sometimes our tight ends will release inside, like on outside veer, if they're sealing a linebacker. So if you're looking at the tight end set, a tight end releases inside the 9 technique or whatever technique's playing, and if it's 7, he would go outside of him. And then the halfback is going to wheel outside of him down the sideline, usually around the hash mark. And the quarterback, what we try to do with the quarterback is he's going to fake to the fullback, but to the tight end side, he is going to actually go down the field off the line at 45, about 4 steps. He really sells the option into the tight end, and we give you like a full flow to be able to sell that pass. Now, we also run it split. The only difference there is that on the quarterback side, he's just going to basically ride and take his normal 3-step drop, and the split end's running what we call a skinny post, and the halfback's wheeling down the sideline on him. So that's one of our top ones that we run, and we have a lot of success with that. The other is what we call verticals, and we do this a couple of different ways. One is we'll just do it kind of a 3-receiver route. We'll bring the motion all the way across and show option, but we'll run the halfback rather than the receiver switching. We just have the inside receiver, the wingman, outside release, a couple of steps straight down the field vertical. But we do have our split end run an option route. So if he's to say it's a cover 3 and you got a soft corner, we're not going to try to beat him deep. He's going to pull up at 6 or 8 yards, and in case the free safety plays deep, if he doesn't bite on the pitch or the quarterback, and we don't have the throw, we've got to have an outlet throw. So we'll pull off and throw the hitch route or the hook route to the wide receiver, and then the backside receiver, we do different things with them, but usually we're occupying the backside receiver. So that's our kind of our play side vertical. Then sometimes, lots of times, we run 4 vertical. If we catch you in 3 deep, or if we catch you trying to roll, or even in a 4 deep, if you're playing 2 hard corners, we'll go 4 vertical in a heartbeat and get our receivers. And if we got a tight end and an in with our wing, we've got 2 ways of doing it. Sometimes the tight end's the vertical and the wing runs the wheel. Sometimes we let the tight end run the wheel and the wing be the vertical guy. And then we'll also do this out of the double wide look, where we take the tight end out of the game and bring that person in. But that's probably our 2 top ones, with the 4 vertical, 3 vertical, and then the wheel routes. It's just very difficult for you to play the option and sit back and wait on the pass. It's probably not a great play on 3rd and 20. That's the issue that we have. And then our third play, and this may not sound like a huge play of any kind, is we just raise up and throw it out the split end.
Right. Well, that is a big play.
Because could be a 5, 6, 7 yard gain.
Right. And it moves the chains. It moves the
chains.
It sets up, like I was big on throwing the hitch on 1st down. And I used to say, 2nd and 4, well, I can get a 1st down. You don't have to be Newt Rockney to get 4 yards and 2 downs.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a great way. If teams are playing us an 8-man, one of my things I used to tell the quarterbacks, 8 between the slots, throw quicks and hots. So if we had 8 between our slots, we would throw that flash pass out there all the time to the wideout and take a 5 or 6 yard gain. But every once in a while, that flash would go the distance for a touchdown because the corner would miss the tackle and he's down the sideline. So that may not seem like a big play, but that keeps the chains moving and keeps the defense on its heels. No doubt about it.
Yeah, exactly. We were in a playoff game, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago, when I had that real good quarterback, and we had a receiver that could fly. and they were playing our run really tough. And what got us going that game was that little hitch pass. I think we threw it 3 times in a drive, and this split end that we had was able to make a move and turn a 4-yard catch into about a 15-yard play, and he got a couple of first downs for us. And then the next thing you know, that's just enough to aggravate them enough to where all of a sudden our running game started picking up. And that's what you got to do. I remember a quote by Bear Bryant when they were running the wishbone in Alabama that he said, this is the greatest pass offense that a person could ever have. They had the 2 wides, they had the 3 backs back there.
Right.
But he said, you get one-on-one coverage. And he said that's all you want in a passing game. And that's true today. That's what everybody wants. They want to get a guy one-on-one. And he says because you have to commit so many defenders to playing the option. So I think that's still true today.
It's interesting about that you say that about Bear Bryant, because, they had a thing on ESPN that how few Alabama quarterbacks in recent years have made it in the pros. Well, the interesting thing is the most quarterbacks Alabama ever had in the pros were all wishbone quarterbacks.
That is an interesting.
Rutledge, those guys were all Rutledge, Richard Todd, and there's a couple others back there that were all wishbone guys. Oh, Hunter, Scott Hunter. Those guys were all wishbone guys. They were all running quarterbacks. Richard Todd played with the Jets, and they named a couple others too. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they had more pro quarterbacks during the wishbone period than they've had during any other period in the school's history. It's kind of interesting.
That is kind of interesting. Yeah.
And people forget that Todd and Rutledge and those guys they all made it in the pros. Did well in the pros. So, you can, let me tell you this. I mean, as I said, I get a kick out of when announcers say, well, Navy's offense Navy being a 3rd and 12, or Georgia Tech's in a 3rd and 12, and they say, well, that's the weakness of this offense. They're not good in 3rd and 12. Show me an offense that is good in 3rd and 12.
Absolutely.
I don't know one. Whether you run
nobody's good in 3rd and 12.
No, nobody's good in 3rd and 12.
Yeah, to me, you don't want to turn the ball over in 3rd and 12.
You want to add to the punt.
That's right.
And the other thing they say is like Navy's down 2 touchdowns, and they say, well, this offense isn't designed to be behind 2 touchdowns. Well, I guarantee you, I never designed an offense to start out down 2 touchdowns either. I don't know what they're saying. I don't know. Bill Walsh was a pretty good passing coach. I don't think he designed his offense to be down 2 touchdowns.
Exactly. But, I know you've experienced this, and I have too. You've been behind 2 touchdowns in the first quarter. You've been behind 3 in the second half. But I feel as comfortable coming from behind in this offense as I do in any other offense, because if you're down, you know what you can do, and you just got to be patient with it and keep doing it. And we've had some great come from behind wins after being down in big games against some very good teams. And it's just a matter of being patient, understanding what you can do, and getting your kids to believe in that. And I just think it's a lot of people don't understand that, especially TV announcers.
Well, I'll tell you, the defining moment in our run at Charleston was we were 1-2 and down 24-6 to Wesleyan, West Virginia Wesleyan, at half. And they were picked second in our conference that year. That was my first year at Charleston. And Bill Struble had done a great job up there, and Paul Price, who's just been named the head coach at Concord, was his defensive coordinator. And we're down 24-6 at half, and I had taken over a losing program. And right there we were at a crossroads, and we came back and won 39-34 with a great second half, and threw for 400 yards and rushed for 250, and came back and won that game. And that turned the whole thing around. Then we went on a run and wound up finishing the season 8-3. So, I mean, you can come from, but we didn't all of a sudden change offenses. We just, kept doing what we were doing and just start hitting passes that we weren't hitting in the first half, as they really loaded the box against us and opened up the passing game. I want to ask you to talk a little bit about your book. You have a great book out, and I want people to know about it. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your book before we wrap up?
Well, it's called Faith, Family, and Football. And
I love the title, by the way.
Well, thank you. A few years ago, just almost felt like I needed to do that. I'd been in the game a long time, and it was one of those things I prayed about. As a lot of coaches are, I'm kind of a private person, and I didn't know if I wanted to share some of the information that I would need to if I wrote about this, because a lot of it is about some of the things that I've experienced as coaches and had a couple of difficult situations early in my career. But it's a story about overcoming adversity, about a young man that was seriously injured back in 1976, I guess it was, when I was first started coaching, and our relationship and the things that he went through and his family and that I went through with them over a long period of time in his life. And that's a theme probably that runs through the book. I think another thing that I spend a lot of time talking about is maximizing your potential with the talents and gifts and abilities that God gives us to get the most out of what we have, and never settle for, mediocrity, because I think that we have a lot to be thankful for, and I think that we were created to be extraordinary human beings, not ordinary, but extraordinary. And that's another theme that runs through the book. And then I think probably the third thing, if as you go through it, you'll get a little glimpse about some of the history of Kentucky football, because like you, not talking about our age or anything, but we have been around a few years, and you see a lot of football from how it's played, and the advent of the passing game, and how that makes coaches change and adapt to today's style of football. And I was fortunate enough to see some of the quarterbacks of some that went on into the NFL and how it changed high school football in Kentucky. So there's a little bit of everything, I guess, for everyone in there, because I've had quite a few people that would email me and with comments such as, I didn't know anything about football, but he said, I really like the rest of it. And I've had a lot of coaches say that it helped them keep things in perspective and maybe get them back on the right track about faith, family, and football, and keep things in that order, which I think is very important for anyone that's coaching this game, to keep things in perspective so you can do it the right way.
Well, I agree 100%. And, the family part of it is the part I think that a lot of coaches forget about, especially young coaches. They make the mistake of always wanting to be in the office. And one of the things that I used to have to kick my coaches out of the office. I wasn't a grinder. And that's why I think my staff always stayed with me. I never lost coaches. I had the same group for 6 years at Charleston, and one of the things was I felt like it was important for them to get home at a time when they could see their family. And so I said, look, if we have to stay in the office every night till 11 o'clock, then we should be selling insurance or doing something else, because it's not that complicated of a game. My play sheet every game was on an index card. All I had on there was a few formations that I wanted to make sure I used. But other than that, when you have a system, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every week. And I know you do. You have a system in place that if you right now, how you're going to attack every defense on your schedule. And that's how I was. But I really liked the book. I thought it was an excellent book. And it touched on a lot of areas that people are afraid to talk about in today's society. Would you agree with that? Or
I would agree with that. And that's, like I said, I had to think about this a little bit. Because sometimes you have to open yourself up, and there's always a chance for some criticism out there, because anytime you talk about faith, they say, well, should that be involved in sports? Well, I think faith is integral part of a human being. I think there's three parts of a human. You know, that's your spirit, and that's your physical part, and that's your mental part. And I think all those go into making a great football player. If you can expound on each one of those, I think it's what goes into making a great human being. Again, that's the way we were created. And I did touch on some things about how parents look at their kids, and a little bit into camps and things like that people need to know about. I had a lot of parents who had responded. One in particular said, I wish I'd read this before my kids came through. I would have known a little bit better how to handle some of the misinformation that they may have been getting, you know, from coaches and concerned people that may not have known exactly what they were saying. So, yeah, sometimes you have to reach out there for that. But that's what I hope to be able to share, and maybe some young coach, and some have, will pick it up and say, hey, this was important for me to be able to read.
Well, you know, today's signing day, and one of the things that changed in the time that I started in coaching in the 70s to now is, in the old days, when a kid made a commitment to a school prior to signing day, I stopped recruiting him. I never thought to recruit him anymore, because I felt like if he changed his mind after he committed, then that didn't show a lot of character. Well, now kids commit, decommit, commit, decommit. I know there was a kid that committed to all 5 of his visits. He committed to 5 schools. And then ESPN plays it up, and they have all the hats in front of him, and well, what happened to the commitment? You know, what are you teaching the kid? You know,
Absolutely.
in my day, you made a commitment, you made the commitment. And, you know, it works the other way, too. I mean, I picked up players over the years where they were promised a scholarship at a particular school, and then they dropped it the last weekend of recruiting. And then I wound up with them, you know. But I always told our coaches, if there was a commitment to the kid committed to us, then we were going to keep him no matter what. Didn't matter who else wanted to come. We were, you know, going to honor our commitment to the first kid that committed. And so it works both ways. But I see, you know, kind of a breakdown in that now, and nobody seems to be alarmed about it.
I would agree. I think that if you do things the right way, that things have a way of working out for you. But I don't know if our society believes that. But I've always believed in our program, and I know in your program you've done those things. And I think integrity is something that you can't put a price on. But I think in the long run people will appreciate it. Or at least I hope they will, because I think that's what we're supposed to do. I think we're supposed to teach young people that this is the right way. And I've always tried to, in my coaching, and what I try to get our coaches to do and our players is take the high road. And if somebody else wants to do something the wrong way, well, that's their business, but it's not right. And the same thing goes with the college recruiting, the ESPN. It's just totally out of hand. I don't see how it's ever going to go back, probably the way it used to be. But I would hope to see that coaches would become a little more character-laden and do things the right way, because I think we're teaching our young people the wrong lessons.
Well, I agree with you, and I again, one of my things was that I followed the Aristotle's quote that the purpose of education was to pass on values. And I believe that football coaches are educators and are passing on values and just using football as a vehicle to do it. And so a lot of times, and nowadays, as I said, you know, as the quest for fame or whatever increases, sometimes people overlook those values. You know, you look at a guy like the Greg Hardy guy at Dallas that beat his girlfriend senseless, and Jerry Owens says he's a leader? What, are you kidding me? I mean, what example is that? You know, in the old days, that guy never. Do you think he would ever play for Tom Landry? I doubt it.
You're right.
or I can't see Vince Lombardi signing him, or somebody, one of those guys, the guys that are the pillars of the game. But I think your book brings out a lot of these things, and it's a fast read. I mean, you can read through it because it's entertaining. Well, for a football coach, I mean, you can identify with a lot of things that you talk about in your book. I think it's a great read, and I'd recommend it to anybody, football coaches, non-football coaches, parents, whatever. I would certainly recommend it. I think it's a great read, and I thank you for writing it. I think you did a great job with that.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a big compliment coming from you.
Well, listen, we're going to wrap up. Phil, it's been a pleasure. Again, I have the greatest respect for you, and I really enjoyed our chat today, and I think our listeners will enjoy it as well.
Well, thank you for having me, and stay in touch.
Will do.
Chalk Talk is a production of Option Central, the premier source for all things option football. Ready to improve your option football coaching skills? It's time to join OptionCentral.net right now.